We began yesterday with this most important assertion of the Mother that Sri Aurobindo is not the culmination of the past, but the beginning of a new future. We cannot understand or correctly practice his yoga if we do not make the necessary correction to disengage from the past and even the best of the past before we enter into the practice or the realization of the new future. Unfortunately, the mass of spiritual literature, of spiritual experience, of teachings, even of the mood of spirituality all over the world is so deeply infused with the values of the past spiritual practices and goals that it is often difficult for us to fully disengage. And we will discuss this shortly. There is a fundamental correction to be made before we can even speak of the form of practice of the integral yoga. Otherwise, we will say, in the integral yoga we do this, we do that, and this is how it works. In comparison with that system of yoga where you do this way, that way, and it just becomes another different form, another different set of practices, another different combinations of priorities. For what? The for what is the question which will be the single most important thing which we have to change in us entirely. It is almost an inversion of all that we know of what spirituality represents. In all the past spiritual traditions as they survive today, I don't mean they began like that, as they survive today, the principal goal is the liberation of the soul out of ignorance and generally out of the physical world and the physical body. Sometimes aligned to the end of physical life, sometimes in between by some process of practices, you purify yourself until you become free and then go away. Sri Aurobindo's yoga will be the very opposite, as we will see. Even in the ashram, even some of those who have been there for years, who have read all the works of Sri Aurobindo, I hear from them occasionally these phrases such as, I will do my work and then I will go away. Or, in this lifetime, if I attain to self-realization, that is good enough. I will just do purification and realize my psychic and that's all I need. And it means they have not understood what this yoga is about. I'm saying it in very sharp terms, perhaps, but it needs to be recognized for what it is. Otherwise, it's leaving things blurred in a vague distinction allows for a lot of confusion and mixture. Sri Aurobindo's yoga is a fundamentally new approach. Perhaps the closest would be the Vedic realization, but even that falls short. And in this fundamentally new approach, there is the complete unification, healing, and perfection of the two extremes of creation, spirit and matter. In the Life Divine, Sri Aurobindo begins with this, the rejection of the materialist, the denial of the materialist, and the rejection of the ascetic. The materialist says, there's no such thing as spirit. The ascetic says matter is all a big trap or a big mess of ignorance or an illusion. Each rejects the other extreme. And Sri Aurobindo then takes logically, experientially steps to recover the underlying oneness of these two poles of existence. By eliminating any one of them, existence itself is compromised, and any realization of any kind or any practice of any spirituality would be fundamentally compromised. It would be as if a leg is cut off. So, in the very approach of the integral yoga, the first correction is this. We are spirit. We are Satchidananda first and foremost. As is the entire world, spirit, Satchidananda first and foremost. Satchidananda manifesting its bliss, its consciousness, its existence in an outburst of delight, forming for the purpose of the unfoldment of delight the play of innumerable possibilities, becomes the whole creation, the whole universe, all the planes of consciousness, all the way down to the most material. All is Satchidananda. Including the freedom to oppose itself, including the freedom to limit itself almost to the point of oblivion, self-loss, including the experience of loss of entire awareness, entire knowledge, entire power, entire bliss, into the very opposite extreme of suffering, ignorance, helplessness, which also is part of the play of its delight. Just as little children, one of the most enjoyable games we have is to play hide and seek. To be able to hide until it seems as if you don't exist in the world is a joy in itself. But the joy is incomplete until you are found. The seek follows the hide. And the joy of the seek is in being found finally. And if you're so well hidden that they can't find you, what do? You come out a little bit. Give them a hint of where you are. And when finally you are found, you burst out in joy at being found, and the finder bursts out in joy at finding you. Isn't it? Such is the nature of this world and this experience of self-loss, which we chose to participate in. Not everyone did. Not all beings who are expressions of the play of the Satchidananda. There are so many worlds, innumerable worlds of consciousness above, which are so full of delight and bliss and oneness. And we read the passage from Savitri this morning. Domains of vast calm and light and beauty and delight. And then lower down, other worlds of the mind, including an infinity of worlds of mind. And in the vital, the entire range of the most horrible hells to the most beautiful heavens are all in the vital worlds. And they may appear to be so beautiful spiritually, but they still belong to the vital worlds. In the very nature of the vital, each one is an extreme exaggeration of an aspect in complete opposition to other aspects. And all these are worlds you could choose to live in, and beings do. And there is an infinity of beings who live in those worlds. And then there are those of us who choose to come down all the way into the physical world, to take birth here, into that experience of complete self-loss, suffering, helplessness, and incapacity. And these are considered by those beings of higher worlds as the more adventurous souls. It's a common experience for many who have out-of-body experiences that they wander into these worlds of the vital and mental. Those beings look at you and say, they recognize immediately that you're not one of them. They say, you are one of those adventurous ones. Going back to the physical world, wow. And we chose to enter this. But because we are fundamentally Satchidananda, there is nothing which can prevent us from the recovery. And so having done the hide, now we are in the process of the seek. And the first phase of that seek is to seek ourselves, emerging out of that incapacity to full awakening, which the first part of is so difficult because we have lost memory also of what we are. Nature has to push us. Okay, my child, a little more, and through a lot of pain and struggle, she brings us to this semi-wakefulness of awareness. And then we begin to say, yes, but of course there is more. And then the seek begins to become more and more direct and conscious. And the second phase, or the other aspect of the seek, is to discover the same divinity in others, which will complete the collective experience of the Satchidananda. Even as the individual experience is the first step, it is incomplete unless all of us participate in the Satchidananda. Such is the journey of the evolution. Having made the downfall, so to say, the rise and the rediscovery into this. Now, a yoga which recognizes this as the primary purpose of our existence is fundamentally different from anything which requires you to withdraw and go back. This is something extremely important we have to understand, and it's a clear-cut distinction from all other systems and their goals. And even if the methods are similar, the goals being different, the manner of practice is also fundamentally different. So now you see why Sri Aurobindo is the beginning of a new future, isn't it? Because there is nothing out there which takes this as the primary objective. Having said this, what is the way forward? What are the characteristics of this way forward? And from there, therefore, the nature of the practice. 2 more corrections have to be fully implemented before we can enter that and understand that completely. First, that this purpose was not just our soul's purpose, it was also the cosmic purpose. So when the Satchidananda became matter and went into self-loss, the emergence out of matter into self-finding is also a cosmic purpose. So nature and the evolution she builds is also following this purpose. That means everything nature builds is an attempt to create vehicles, containers, instruments for Satchidananda. You, as a personality, as an individual, your body, including the physical body, is meant by nature to become a vehicle for Satchidananda. Think about what that means. Your life energies, your emotions, your nature, including all the impulsions of desire, is intended to be growing towards the realization and the manifestation of a Satchidananda. Your mind, with its incapacity and its errors, its ignorances, its biases, and so on, is meant to be a vehicle of Satchidananda. And nature has been preparing it for that. And if you let her do it long enough, eventually she'll get there, perhaps. Because it's very difficult beyond a point for her to push from below unless there's a help from above. And this is where this yoga really begins, with the help from above and with our awakening in between as the link from the push below and the help above. But we have to understand everything within us has already been built for that purpose. So you cannot take any part of you and say, this is bad, this is to be discarded, this is horrible in me, this is impure, this is dark, this is... which you will find constantly the theme of all the ascetic practices. The constant negation, the rejection, the revolt, despising even things in nature, things in matter, things in the world, things in our consciousness, and particularly in the body. All that is a perversion and a falsehood. Sharp words, but once you accept this as your goal, you have to recognize these are perversions and a falsehood. Make this correction in yourself entirely. That means you have to actually conceive of yourself infinite, spirit, eternal existence, consciousness, bliss. This is what you are. Entering into a vehicle which seems as if the very opposite, binding you in form and in limitation. But entering it for what purpose? In order to bring that into this and assist the transformation of this. So if nature has built this vehicle over time, and she's gone through a lot of steps, including the animal stages, and then you enter into it as a soul, you've taken birth into this body, it is because you want to assist in this lifting movement. And you bring with you that which is needed for this lifting and awakening movement. And therefore, you should consider this vehicle given to you as the single most precious vehicle. Do not ever neglect the body. Do not ever think in terms of do my work and go away and leave behind. That's not it at all. In the Isha Upanishad, the very first verse is, all this is for the habitation of the Lord. Every tiniest universe in the whole universe. This includes, well, the flowers also, the vase, your body. Each is a universe in itself. If you looked at the flower and went deep into it, you would find that there's a way, mathematically, you can map every single atom of the flower to the whole universe in 3D. Don't go into the technicality. It doesn't matter what the size is. By an infinitesimal division, you can map it to the infinity of the universe. It's as if a miniaturized universe, it is a universe in itself. Each universe within the whole universe is intended for the habitation of the Lord. But the Lord right now is concealed, and the awakening to full habitation is still taking place. So are we, isn't it? And then it teaches you how you should live life, therefore. By that renounced, thou must enjoy. Renouncing what? The things which limit your capacity to enjoy, you should enjoy. Again, you see the complete opposition of the ascetic path, where enjoyment and desire are a trap. Get out of it. And here, no, we want to enjoy, but we want to enjoy truly, completely, without limitation. And the means to enjoy is to renounce the desire which limits your capacity to enjoy. See, the error is to bind yourself to a means that limits the capacity to enjoy, and that's the desired thing. And getting rid of it, you're able to enjoy fully. We don't enter too much into how this is to be put into practice, but you get the sense of the change that it represents. But the second verse of the Isha Upanishad then goes, thus doing the works, you must wish to live 100 years entirely. Jiji vishet shatam samaha. You must wish to, want to, will to live entirely, the fullness of the 100 years. And this sama, the fullness, the equalness of it is a very interesting term. It's not that you're going to have the time of your life when you were young and then you're exhausted and then you kind of struggle through your years of retirement until you eventually die. Equally, fully, entirely, every moment, every day should be an occasion for the full enjoyment of life. Interesting, isn't it? So different from the ascetic approach. And the problem is, when we take to the spiritual life, the past ascetic imprint is so strong, every now and then we come across this tendency, but I'm trying to purify myself from my desire. I'm trying to not get stuck. I can't enjoy this. I have to pull back from this. And all those tendencies which come with the idea that you have to reject life, reject things in you in order to somehow become more spiritual and pure. So when we will use the word purification, it will be common to the ascetic path, which also uses the word purification. But for them, purification is a denial of everything which prevents you from escaping. Whereas here, purification in the integral yoga is used to separate out the mixtures which prevent the fullness of the truth from expressing. The distortions which prevent the right from becoming. And seen in this way, everything inside you is already right but distorted. And you set right the distortions. Take desire, for example. It craves form and binds to form, but the form breaks, and with it your desire is deceived. If instead you crave that which fills the form, not bound to form anymore, the whole relationship changes, and the desire now can find fulfillment without disappointment. Small corrections. You look at somebody who has something more than you feel jealous. Oh, I must get rid of my jealousy. Yes, that's perhaps one way, but there's two ways to get rid of it. One is by suppressing it in the ascetic mode. The other is by fulfilling its truth. You look at someone who has something more, you say, wow, I also want to be able to do that. And you use it as a means of inspiration and growth. And the so-called jealousy is a great strength given to you, isn't it? Every time in your mind you find a distortion and a limitation, you step back. How did this happen? Oh, I gave too much importance to this one side and became blind to that other side. So the correction was to bring a greater equality and flexibility in my perspective. But it's not that I intended to make a mistake. It was just exaggeration or incapacity or a mixture of some kind. And I clear it out, widen it, deepen it. Every error that comes your way is an aid pointing to the little part that needs correction next. You could, for example, be walking a path, trip on a stone and fall, blame the stone. Or you can say, the stone made me realize that I shouldn't be looking at the sky only, I should also be enjoying the ground as I walk, right? So every problem forces you to widen, to become more flexible, to open out more, and everything in the universe is here to help you to grow to this fulfillment. As against the ascetic path in which everything is here to trap you, bind you, and limit you from getting out. You see? So in the ascetic path, every movement of your life binds and is a problem. In the integral yoga and the sunlit path, everything here is intended to help you. However tiny, however extreme, however Sri Aurobindo uses the word disastrous, even in life, it's a means to a growth. Having made this general sense of correction, again one highlight, all powers within you are potentially divine powers, are growing towards their divine potential, okay, to their divine eventual realization. So nothing in you is to be cut off or rejected, all is to be perfected. Every single capacity, every single tendency, every single faculty is to be perfected and divinized. And this is the reason why Sri Aurobindo spends so many chapters in the integral, in the synthesis of yoga, to map out human psychology in such detail. Contrast that with most of the texts of the ascetic paths where all this doesn't matter. So they map out only the higher worlds and the means to exit. And each system uses a different exit point perhaps, or a different lever for the effort to exit. But here, since the goal is perfectioning, you must know all this in great detail. And each of these things which needs to be made perfect needs to be first refined and disengaged from the mixture with other parts. For example, your intelligence, which is going to be a vehicle for divine knowledge, cannot be clouded by your desire impulse, which warps the capacity to have true, complete knowledge. Equality in the mind is a necessary condition to be able to have true knowledge, undistorted. Which then means also in your life energies, you must be able to bring about a certain kind of equality. But the nature of life force is to enjoy. So it is not by becoming dull, tepid, or weak that you will bring the equality. The equality must be such that it must allow the most intense enjoyments without being lost in the enjoyment itself. In the physical body equally. This being the container, the vehicle, the good health, the well-being, the full perfection and beauty of the body is extremely important. In many of the ascetic traditions, you will find they celebrate ugliness. You see that in some of you have seen examples of that. This is not acceptable here. Not only in the physical world everything should be beautiful, but our body itself, not just in its external appearance, in its internal working also must be beautiful, which means what in practice? Harmonious and the good health. Neglect is not acceptable. And for those because of the spiritual turn, will say, I reject medical science because it is not aligned to my spiritual. I believe in faith and the divine will do everything. No, it's an error. Your intelligence is given to you for the exploration of the physical world and requires you to explore your physical body and to use the knowledge for its development equally. Just because the current medical science has become a kind of a religious exaggeration of a rationalized belief, empirical belief system, does not mean that you reject the good part of it. All these are intended as means of knowledge to be utilized for your body's growth and perfection. So, Mother was keenly interested in what are the means available in the current methods, even in sciences or in the medicine. And there's a point where she called the most senior medical head of what was JIPMER, it was the most elite medical center in Pondicherry. And the head of that, she called him and said, can your science do anything to help this body? Very interesting question. Of course, for her, when she asked that question, the person became representative of humanity. And if humanity was ready, it would have said, yes, Mother, we will do. It was not. So he said, sorry, Mother, it's age, we can do nothing. Mother said, okay. But she was very keen to find out what are the things to be used. And she even spoke of what are the further medical breakthroughs which would happen. But all this is to say that any attempt to disregard the body of knowledge given and the intelligence given is also an error. So now, with a shift and a correction that all this is sacred, including the knowledge and your capacity for knowledge, intended to be used for the divine perfection, we look at what happens next. For the sake of this perfection, what is the means? Is to take what is as it is and put it in relation with the divine consciousness, which in its higher station is already the perfection we seek, above the mind. Put it in relation. And progressively, this, which is not perfect, is put into more and more direct contact so that not only it opens to the influence of that, but that can come in and reshape and change. What nature was doing by a very slow, laborious process, pushing from below, the upper, higher consciousness can infuse itself and rapidly transform. What would take 1,000,000 years through a slow process of nature can be achieved within a few days or weeks by the direct action of the spiritual force. And so the principal method is to put ourselves, all of ourselves, entirely in relation with the divine consciousness, well, to whatever extent you can, and allow it to work in you. And then it does the work. The burden of the work is actually its. And so the nature of the yoga is very interesting. Sri Aurobindo puts it in this way, because the goal is the complete transformation of our nature. It is the most difficult yoga that you can imagine. But compared to the effort that you have to make and the result that you get for the effort that you made, it is the easiest yoga that you can ever have. Interesting. Very interesting. So, the nature of this fundamental process gives to the integral yoga 3 outstanding features. Outstanding, they really stand out compared to everything else. The first of these is that the action of the higher force working in you does not follow a set prescribed sequence or process which is same for everyone. Because we are different. Our starting point is different. Our natures are different. The parts in us which are more open or less open, more aspiring or more closed, are completely different in each one. And sometimes perhaps different from day to day. And so when there is the action of the force, the yoga force, from above working within us, it begins with that which is most open and most receptive. And grows towards those things which are most closed. That means in your own personal effort, of course, it's not a passive opening. You are participating in the process. In your own personal effort, therefore, the effort you make will begin with the part of you that is most receptive and open. Do not engage with the things which are more difficult in your nature. This is often the commonest mistake people make. That they say, oh, I have this problem of inertia. I really have to overcome it. And I struggle for years and years in tension, struggle, and failure, and repeated failure because you just picked the most difficult part in you. That's not what nature does. What does nature do? She grabs you by the part in you which is the most interested, right? When you engage with life, you don't say, I hate whatever it is, bodybuilding or snorkeling or something, and so I'm going to have to do that for the rest of my life. Isn't that the most crazy thing you could do? You start with, I love to do this, I'm going to do more of it. Right? And the same thing in the yoga. The part in me which is most open, which enjoys the most, which receives the most easily, which aspires, is where I put my primary effort. Do not worry about the rest. As a result then, the process itself from day to day grows from joy to greater joy. From experience, however small, to greater experience. If ever this does not happen to you, recognize that you're making a mistake and make a correction. The journey itself has to become enjoyable. Of course, there will be setbacks, and that's part of the game. But you can even observe how the setback helps you to overcome something or to recognize something that you had missed. And there is a joy in recognizing, yes, I just solved a mystery, I solved a problem, this time now it will be different. And you make a new step, isn't it? So, the first outstanding feature of the integral yoga is that there is no fixed sequence and process. It varies with each one, and yet there is an overall framework. What that framework is, we will come to a little later, after we discuss these three outstanding features. But there is a framework, and once you recognize the framework, you can begin to put this into an overall form of practice. But in the form of practice, because it's a broad framework, you will focus on the parts which are the most open, the most receptive, the most enjoyable. Okay? Second, so again, to highlight this point, any idea of suffering in yoga must be rejected. In the ascetic paths, they celebrate the suffering because it's a measure of how hard you're working or how much the yoga is doing well. Right? I am suffering so much. I have done so many years of intense tapasya, and so I am so great. I've achieved so much. I'm a great yogi. In the integral yoga, if you say that, then you can say, I'm sorry, you wasted your life. It's a fact. We do meet people occasionally, and for them it's a bit of a shock that they realize that they needn't have suffered at all. The suffering will come in any way because of the very nature of life, but it's always there to point out the weaknesses or the parts in you which need now to wake up and participate. But you don't need to be seeking it. And so, even now, like I said, even in the ashram, there are people who use this phrase, oh, his sadhana is just beginning. Meaning, his suffering is just starting, and the word sadhana is the yoga practice. His yoga practice is just beginning, as a way of saying his suffering is just beginning. Come on. It's completely wrong. Or that belongs to the ascetic paths because that's their way to cut off and suppress everything, and it's a painful process to escape. But here, since the goal is to transform, everything is there in the universe outside you and within you to assist in this divinization. And suffering is unnecessary, even a falsehood. If at all you find yourself suffering repeatedly, either make a correction or recognize there's something in you that enjoys the suffering with a wrong idea of the ego saying, I am so great, I am suffering. So that is the first outstanding feature of the integral yoga. The second outstanding feature of the integral yoga is that it takes your nature as it is. whatever it may be, whatever your current status in your capacities, incapacities, in your evolution, development or lack thereof, that's your starting point. Precisely because it takes up all of your nature for transformation, it doesn't matter what it is. Unlike the ascetic systems, where you need a precondition, you must be of this type to fit this system of practice, you must be of that type to fit that system. Because they all look at a specialized aspect of your nature as your primary means of practice, and they need you to match that specialized aspect. Or if the match is not too well, you struggle a lot. You take a person who's temperamentally devotional in the heart and put them to work in physical labor, it's not going to work. They will struggle a lot, they will suffer a lot, but it helps to boost the ego. There was somebody from the Sri Aurobindo ashram who went to one of these other very popular movements in India currently, and he said the first thing we were all made to do was to go and clean the toilets. And this guy came back and said, wow, you see how much sadhana they do? They start by cleaning toilets. Here in our ashram, we do nothing. We just have a good time. Well, he was right on that aspect. You do nothing. But cleaning toilets is not useful either spiritually. And if you go to those spaces where they have cleaning toilets as your first initiation into their practice, you'll find some people who will be first volunteers for cleaning toilets. I will do. And I'm so happy, you see how great I am. I clean all the toilets happily. Isn't it? It's the spiritual ego that seizes the form and says, I am so great because I do something uncomfortable and suffer with a smile on my face. Spiritually, no value. So, if you had to be a rational, intellectual type and you were put to cleaning toilets, doesn't work. You would eventually drift away and find a system that fits your type. Unlike those specialized systems, the integral yoga includes all variations and all types. Whoever you are, wherever you are in humanity, that's your starting point. So there is no such other existing system because this aims at a total perfection. It's possible to have this. Otherwise, you cannot have it. And we can say this almost as a corollary. There is no other system in which this outstanding feature exists, precisely because they limit themselves to an aspect. So, since everything is taken up, something very important, all the parts of your nature are now to be fulfilled. Observe within you. All the tendencies, all the capacities, all the skills, all the yearnings, all the desires, all the dreams, all the ideals. Each of these is precious and valuable and points to a potential and a fulfillment. If not in this life, eventually in your journey. And some of us dream of certain things, others dream of other things, isn't it? That's your line. That's your turn of temperament. And that's your way to fulfillment. Do not ever look at somebody else's dream and say, oh, I should be dreaming that because that's what that guy does. No, that's his way. Your way is different. Follow your dream. Follow your aspiration. And to dwell on that ideal is your way, if that's what you find naturally happening within you. And equally, there's the opposite side, that when you have a very strong resistance or not, or stubborn tendency, the mother observes, it's often there to help you make your perfection more complete. If, for example, you had to develop a certain aspect of your knowledge, you will often find a tendency within you which contradicts it. And by the effort to overcome the tendency, you put more energy and make more perfect that aspect of your seeking. If that resistance was not there, you would not put that much energy. So when you look at things in this way, you realize even the so-called limitations that you have are all helping you by aligning and assisting in the greater perfection, the greater refinement of certain parts of your nature. Wow, what a beautiful way of looking at life and of the whole journey of awakening, isn't it? Nothing at all is to be neglected or criticized. All is to be taken up and perfected. This is the second outstanding feature of the integral yoga, that you begin as you are, where you are, and everything is to be taken up for perfection. The third outstanding feature is, because all of you is included, all the experiences of your life are meant to assist or are used as a means for your growth. Everything, and I want to read this passage from Sri Aurobindo because it is so powerful. Thirdly, the divine power in us uses all life as the means of this integral yoga. Every experience and outer contact with our world environment, however trifling or however disastrous, is used for the work. And every inner experience, even to the most repellent suffering or the most humiliating fall, becomes a step on the path to perfection. And we realize in ourselves with opened eyes the method of God in the world. His purpose of light in the obscure, of might in the weak and fallen, of delight in what is grievous and miserable. And the divine method uses all means. And it's interesting, we have all had in our life this experience that sometimes there's a problem that is persistent, we struggle against it, we fail, and eventually we make a correction internally. Sometimes the correction is simply ask for help. We forgot that we were to ask for help, and we were primarily pushing against it with our own limited strength, and we turn and ask for help, and sometimes almost immediately the problem changes. Sometimes it simply goes away, or when we look at it, it has changed form. It doesn't mean anymore the same thing, and now it's no more a problem. That shift takes place with the shift within us. And when increasingly this shift within us grows, we begin to perceive directly this play of work, of the divine working through all circumstances. And even the most trivial is used for something. And all this leads to a fundamental perception behind it all. The whole journey of this nature pushing through life was a yoga. A gigantic, collective, universal movement of nature's yoga pushing, subconsciously, unconsciously, without our active participation, and bringing us to that point where we begin to become conscious and then to participate consciously, and that's when it becomes our individual yoga. Seen in this way, you look at the world for what it is, and everything is seen to be a part of this movement. Nothing is left out. And however disturbing, however painful circumstances may appear to be, if we can look consciously behind the scenes, we will see what the force is working and attempting to do. So these three being outstanding features of the integral yoga, and you can now understand why, because it is an affirmative yoga, because it aims at a complete transformation of life and divinization. Otherwise these three could not exist. Now we come from there to what is the form and the means of this to be put into practice. Sri Aurobindo articulates this in great detail. I will not go into detail. I will rather just focus on a few important aspects of the practice in a way that we can weave into our life immediately. Already with this fundamental shift that we have discussed so far, you can recognize that your way of looking at your life is different. If you still say that I am not doing a spiritual life and I am not yet spiritual enough, then you have missed the point. You are already what you need to be. That's your starting point, remember? The only thing you can complain about is, I have not made it conscious enough. So the next immediate thing you would do is to make it conscious, that's all. Everything that you do, that you have been doing all these days, which you may continue to do exactly as it is in form, you will make more conscious. And then you will bring into it the question, why am I doing this after all? And you'll begin to notice, when I do this, I do feel a growth. When I do that, I don't feel much. And at which point, either automatically that activity will lose value for you, lose interest and fade out. Or you'll say, but why isn't it interesting? And you'll find a way to make it more interesting. If every morning when you take your shower, you sing. I don't know how many of you do that. Some people do. Why do I do it? It makes me feel good. I enjoy doing it, or it's just an old habit. If it's merely a habit, I say, didn't lead to much. If I enjoy it, I say, yes, let me amplify the joy. Let me refine the joy. And if it's merely a habit, I will say, why am I doing this? Why not use it also? And you will consciously refine it or eliminate it. Either choose to say, okay, I'm going to do this with a quiet mind, with a concentration on the moment, or I'm going to enjoy the singing and burst with my heart's delight. Find your correction. But the point is, bit by bit, all the activities that you currently do, removing nothing, changing nothing in form, you will change entirely in spirit. And this will become then your spiritual life. From the affirmative perspective of affirmative spirituality, spirituality is not what you do, but why you do, how you do, and what it leads you towards. And the moment you become conscious, all these things will start happening. And then perhaps you will also say, and I would like to do this more or that less. Let it flow of its own. And there will be no struggle, there will be no difficulty. I had a friend who was when he came to Aurobindo, had the habit of smoking. Now there's this part within the mind that says it's not good for you, so you need to get rid of it. There's the part from the spiritual training side which says it's an addiction and you need to be free of all addiction. Right? So just to put it in context, Sri Aurobindo used to smoke. It came from his days in England. I think it was a pipe initially, and then even when he came to Pondicherry, he continued to smoke for a pretty long time, even after the mother came. And he comments somewhere, I continued to smoke just to show that you can be a yogi even if you're smoking, it doesn't matter. He made his point. He had already reached the experiences of the supramental consciousness and was pretty much stabilized in it while still taking his pipe. And then one day, I think there was a tendency for the disciples to start looking at him, hey, maybe we can smoke also. And the mother noticed that and she just made a gesture. Smells bad. And Sri Aurobindo put down the pipe, never picked it up again. Just like that, never picked it up. Just to show you that it doesn't matter if you did smoke, but if you chose not to smoke, you could also drop it. Okay, coming back to our friend who is perhaps not yet there. He said, okay, it's part of my discipline to be able to get free. So he struggled, didn't work. But then he took this stance. He said, okay, rather than fighting it, I will build on what is for me giving the joy. And he worked in his own way, worked on the opening and the purification of the consciousness. And then one day, just like that, poof, it stopped. No struggle at all. Just like that, it vanished. Never came back. The urge itself was gone. And this is the way the force of the yoga works in us. And this would be the right way to navigate through such issues also. So, the first part, remember, become conscious. That's the only criticism we can have of not having had sufficiently the participation in the spiritual life. We were unconscious nature's yoga doing it, and now we become conscious, and then changes begin to happen. Having said that, is there a framework for this? And the framework has two components. The objectives and then the form in which the practice takes place. We have to be very clear about the objectives. The form of practice often will become spontaneously obvious or will be a natural result of certain things which will be basic practices. But the objectives need to be clear. Sri Aurobindo articulates this in a six-fold framework, in which the practice itself is woven with the objective. So we'll just skim through that. The first, obviously, is to lay a sufficient foundation. Remember, all these years we have lived a life which was more or less mechanical, automatic, instinctive. You bring it into some degree of awareness, and with that awareness you start separating the mixtures. Here is an impulse, here is a clarity which is not impulsive. Observe, separate, become conscious. I don't go into it. Aurobindo maps out all the fine levels of consciousness in the mind, in the life energies, in the emotions, which need to be thus made conscious, separated, and the word we use is purified from intermixture between each other. But the simplest, the most direct means to be able to do this is to bring entire stillness into that part. Your mind, for example, when you first become conscious, you will notice how much activity or confusion there is. And the more you become observant of it, the more you'll realize the activity and restless confusion is enormous. The common complaint of everybody who says, I want to sit for meditation, every time I sit, I find all the thoughts rushing. What they didn't realize was all those thoughts were already there. When they sat down to meditate, they became conscious of the chaos that was there. That's all. What do you do about it? So the first practice would be a kind of a stilling. And in that stilling, automatically comes a clarification and a purification. But we will see shortly there's an even more direct way to do that. But in this way, you bring stillness in the thoughts, in the mind's awareness, in the emotions, in the life energies and impulses, and even in the body. A very good starting point of practice for that would be basic asanas. But done with that intention of bringing complete stillness. So today, there are many packaged styles of asanas. So there'll be the hot yoga and then the dynamic yoga and all those terms which each one needs to manufacture their own USP. Not all of them serve for this purpose at least. They can have their own benefits. But for this purpose of stilling, you will simply do a stretch, bring awareness into the body, in the whole body if you can, or in that one part of the body which is under stress, stretch, and bring entire stillness. And when you think you've got it most still, become very quiet, and you will notice you can take it a further degree of stillness. And when you think you've reached that limit, you find, oh, I can go still more. It's interesting, as if layer by layer, you're penetrating layers of consciousness in the body itself or in your personality, because it's all mixed finally in the body. Mind awareness, life force energies, and the physical sensations, all bringing into all the way down to the cellular consciousness. Doesn't matter, you don't have to give names. Just bring stillness and more and more. And if you have done that part by part and eventually in the whole body, when you get up from that exercise, you will feel a deep sense of stillness. And in that stillness, any activity, any agitation, any waves will be obvious. Now, there are two things that can happen. One is that you will have the normal habits creeping in. Okay, now my mind habits are restarting. You can watch it. You don't fight it, just watch it. From the part which is still. Interesting. Even as the thoughts return, not all your mind is invaded. There's the part which is in stillness, which is observing, and itself is not agitated. Very interesting. You watch all these thoughts coming, going, and agitations, and say, interesting. But I, who's observing, am in stillness. And then allow that to settle all the way. Not only in the mind, in the emotions also you find there's a part which is in stillness. You find intense distress of certain emotions. You can say, oh, I'm right now very disturbed. Or you can say, the part of me that is aware of the disturbance is not disturbed. Notice that. Put more attention on that. And you come into a state of calm. And interestingly, the agitation in the emotions may continue or may subside. But you who's aware of it are in a state of calm. Notice that. And so in this way, a gradual separation begins to take place, which in the yoga traditions is greatly valued as the separation of the Purusha and Prakriti, the witnessing consciousness and the dynamic processes of nature. But even without using these terms, simply observe. So either one of these happens. Either the old patterns return, or you find you can continue your activity of life in this state of complete stillness. Thoughts may come and go as needed for the work, but when they are not needed, they subside. And you can bring yourself to this point where you can think what you want and choose to not think what you want. One of the results of this very simple state or practice will be your intelligence will be greatly amplified. It's interesting. Looking at it from a very superficial point of view, we might say your brain power is being wasted in all kinds of useless activity, bringing silence amplifies, but there's something far more deep. And the deeper truth is this: the true intelligence is the intelligence which guides your mind processes. You see, when you're trying to solve a problem, how do you know how to solve it? If you already knew, you wouldn't have a problem, right? You don't know how to solve it, that's why it's a problem, and yet you're trying to solve it. Who is giving you the hint of which direction to go? And often when you've almost solved the problem, you say, I'm almost there. How do you know you're almost there when you don't know what it is that you're going to reach? Right? Because there's something deeper, as a deeper intelligence, which already knows the solution, and your surface mind's attainment of the solution is nothing but an awakening to the knowledge already present in these deeper parts. So when there is the stilling in the mind, for example, that deeper knowledge behind naturally reflects easily into the still mind without too many biases. And therefore your intelligence is amplified. When you want to solve a problem in a still state, bloop, the insight comes. Ah, yes. Do this as a practice, you will find with a still mind, your IQ can jump easily 10 to 20 points. Not difficult at all. We'll find an still more important process by which we will bring the stillness, but this is just to explain as a first step what happens quite easily and without struggle. Put this into practice. If we had been taught this as children, and we were practicing this, let's say from the age of 12 or 10 onwards, imagine what a huge benefit it would be. This should be part of our educational system. But now we come to having done a kind of a basic purification. Some of it will have a process of activity also, which I will touch upon later, which can form like, okay, we'll touch upon it now, which forms like a practice in your daily life. A general turning of your consciousness to the divine, a general purification, and the basis for this will be what in the Bhagavad Gita is so greatly celebrated as the unification of the triple path, the Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga and Jnana Yoga. This is not yet the integral yoga, but it can form as a basis in which the purification can take place, all that we have been discussing. And depending on your temperament, you take one of these as your starting point. For those who will say, don't give me theory and philosophy, just tell me what to do. The natural way is to consecrate your efforts to the divine in whatever you do. Start with something very simple, and you can't be doing it the whole day. Start with something where you can concentrate for 5 minutes and you do with full concentration, consecration. It could be a very simple act, and start with simple things. Maybe you sweep your floor. You don't have to clean the toilet. It doesn't matter what you do. That's just the ego trip. Start with a simple floor. Start with wiping your desk. Start with one little corner of your room that you dust. But something which is almost mechanical in its external form so that your mind can be fully concentrated. And you start with this idea, this space is given to you. Remember, it's part of the Satchidananda in the world trying to manifest itself. And the act of cleaning it, sweeping it, wiping it, arranging it is evoking beauty, harmony, perfection in one tiny step. That's your intention. And you yourself do it with that spirit of consecration to the divine, saying all this work which is being done is done by who? It is the Satchidananda working within me secretly through my mind's intelligence, through my life energies and their desires, through my body's actions. It's not I, but the divine working through me to reveal itself. And you do with this immersion. Simple exercise for 2 or 3 minutes. If you enjoy it, let it extend 5 minutes, as long as you like. And it does not matter what you do. If you're sitting in your office, you could do the same thing, because it's not my house or somebody else's business. It is the divine's universe. Everything belongs to the divine, and I will do it with that spirit. So 5 minutes of consecrated action will be your beginning of the karma yoga. I make a clarification here. There are many centers even connected with Sri Aurobindo who invite people and say, come for karma yoga week, which means do some selfless service. That's not karma yoga. Karma yoga is only when it is done with a consecration to the divine. When you do it as a service, to a social service, as an offering or as a free service, that's called seva, service. It's not karma yoga. Okay. So understanding this distinction, do your 5 minutes. If you enjoy it, do it more often. Do little frequent pieces of it, and that's more useful rather than one long immersion. Along with it, and often deriving from it, will be an awakening of the mind's perception, because you're dwelling on this idea, all this is divine, all this is form of Satchidananda. And as I arrange the flowers and I find the way to make it most beautiful, most harmonious, it's revealing the beauty of the Satchidananda. The dwelling on this idea that all this is filled with Satchidananda, is formed of Satchidananda, I am myself a vehicle for that, awakens in the mind the essential elements of the jnana yoga, the yoga of knowledge, the perception of the divine everywhere. And the physical action is now a consecration combining with the mind's awareness. And in this, there are other dimensions one could bring in, dwelling on that which is more permanent and that which is more transitory. The beauty of the flower may go away as the flower fades. The form of the flower is transitory, but the beauty of it is eternal. And the dwelling on the beauty as an aspect of the eternal, and the form as a transitory surface vehicle, and the distinction between these two, changes completely the relationship. This flower that I now enjoy will stay with me forever. You will never again forget it, even if superficially, somewhere deep within you, it's a part of your permanence and eternity. And thus, in this way, various different experiences and perceptions, you dwell upon that which is the underlying permanence and the superficial changing appearance as vehicles for that permanence, and the joy and the knowledge and the power and the play. So the element of a jnana yoga weaves in naturally. And both of these lead to an awakening of increasing gratitude, joy, love, even a kind of a quiet delight when everything is form of divine and your participation gives you great joy and satisfaction. The heart opens. And with the opening of the heart, it's as if everything becomes more living, more beautiful, more deep, more rich. And you feel the love from your heart flow out, and you feel the love of the presence in all things flow in. And there is increasingly this immersion in the bhakti aspect, the bhakti yoga, union in the bhakti. Bhakti cannot be translated purely as devotion. It's this gratitude, love, devotion merged. The sense of the sacred, that you belong, and simply the joy to belong. And that's it. So this is the triple path, and the three merge. If you begin with the bhakti, the karma, consecration, and the jnana perception will eventually grow. You begin with the jnana perception, and the devotion and the consecrated action will eventually follow. But starting with that which is for you the most easy, try to blend eventually, over time, the three tendencies. This will assist in the overall purification of your nature and the overall turn of your nature to the higher sense of purpose, and becomes like a foundation. So this Sri Aurobindo describes as a purificatory stage. And then we move to the formal practice. In the formal practice, there are 6 aspects of the perfection, and there's a natural sequence which we will touch. And you could pick any of these if that is your more natural turn, but you'll find each of these builds and prepares for the next. The first of these is an equality. Because the nature of the divine consciousness is that it is entirely giving itself to everything in the universe. The divine pours itself entirely in this flower to become flower, as it pours itself entirely to form the entire physical earth or the galaxy or the universe. Entirely here. What you hold in your hand is the totality of the divine consciousness, putting itself only in the aspect of flower, entirely. And so the divine love pours itself entirely into flower, even as it pours itself entirely to universe. As we approach the divine consciousness and tend to merge or become one with the divine, it is this aspect of an equality which grows in us. Or to put it another way, as we cultivate the aspect of equality in us, we can grow closer naturally to the divine or become a natural vehicle for the divine consciousness to fill us and flow. It also has the automatic effect of purifying, because the equality allows the stillness to come. And so rather than working exclusively on the stillness as a base, while you could still do that, you could work on the equality first. And through the equality, the stilling in the mind would take place, the stilling in the emotions, the stilling even in the physical body. When you have pain, for example, I just bumped myself, ouch, severe pain. What's your first reaction? Oh, little child, oh, calling. You say, equality. You disengage from the pain, lean back to the underlying sense of equality. The pain is like a little pulsating throb on the surface. Interesting. No reaction, no agitation, no disturbance. And the same in the emotions. Even if I'm going through a very painful passage, underlying base is one of equality. Even in my mind, my biases and preferences which distort knowledge, if I lean back to an underlying equality and begin to observe everything, all facts, all aspects of knowledge with an equal awareness, they fall in the right relation naturally. Distortions fade away. So equality is the underlying basis for true knowledge, for effective action, and even for the body to have true health. So equality, Sri Aurobindo gives enormous importance. It's the foundation on which everything else becomes easy, natural, even spontaneous. Work on this, and on all 3 levels. If you have worked on the earlier aspect of the Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Jnana Yoga, then the equality will be the base that you will lean towards from those 3 entry points. Because ultimately the divine, the self, is equal everywhere. Even as it is entirely unique in its relation to each one, it is also equal to all. In this equality, there will be a further deepening that will take place. And eventually what will happen? The experience of the self dawns as if from behind, slowly permeates the base of equality that exists in you, and the two merge, and eventually you lean back in the self as your foundation of equality. And into this equality, therefore, all the other powers and aspects of self can fill. A wideness, a light, knowledge, power, and the ananda. Sri Aurobindo, in the form of the practice, recommends this process of a descent of peace. Because peace is the first aspect of the self that we can receive, which establishes spontaneously and effortlessly the equality within us. Peace is not silence, it is not stillness, which we have been speaking of. It is an active presence, an active force that fills. And this can be done in the simplest way that he suggests, concentration above the head, where we experience most easily the poise of the self. And opening to the self, we feel above the head a deep, vast, oceanic peace. And initially perhaps it helps you to close your eyes, turn upward, become conscious. If at first you use a little bit of your mind's imagination, don't worry, but become conscious of the peace eventually and remain in this. Either by itself or you may actively initiate it, the peace begins then to settle within you. At first more in the mind and then part by part in the whole of your being. And as that starts happening, automatically it brings not only an equality but a great wideness, a great freedom. And into that freedom, a kind of a quiet joy. A joy which is not disturbed, which is not affected, whatever may happen on the surface. And that is a part of the equality, because the equality of the self knows also the delight of the self, and that begins to reflect in you. So as a practice, the equality will be the single most powerful active effort you make, but the descent of the peace would also be the easiest way by which you will discover your equality and begin to live in it without effort. One of the effects will be spontaneously your mind will become calm, wide and free, and so on. So this would be the first, as in terms of perfection, the equality itself is the perfection that it leans towards eventually in the self. The second of the 6 is the aspect of power, Shakti, which means our existing human capacities are barely a shadow of what we are actually capable of. Of course, your intelligence can amplify, but your life energies also can be able to amplify. Your body itself should be able to do so much more in strength, in flexibility, in form. We are barely at an initial stage of our capacities. And so the infusion of a higher energy to lift all our faculties and capacities to their highest intensity is the next aspect of perfection. Now this is again very broad, very inclusive. Sri Aurobindo describes in particular 4 aspects of our soul powers. You are familiar with these terms in Sanskrit: the Brahmana, the knowledge aspect, Vaishya, the Kshatriya, the power, dynamism aspect, the Vaishya, the harmony, exchange, mutuality, and the Shudra, the service or the expression in perfection of form. Now, this has been the basis, as you're all aware, of what is wrongly today called castes. They were not castes, they were 4 psychological aspects, recognizing that in each one of us, one of these dominate, which makes for a specific turn of your temperament. In some of us, in whom there is a greater richness of these aspects, one dominates and a second is more developed also. In a very few rare ones, a third also is somewhat developed. And in the exceptional human beings, all 4 are reasonably developed and somewhat integrated. They are the ones who achieve extraordinary things. The knowledge, the power, the adventure, the leadership to translate that knowledge into effective action, the ability to organize, harmonize, exchange, develop in mutuality with others, not in isolation. And then each detail of all action to become perfect in a spirit of self-giving and service and love. Now you'll notice in all the kinds of jobs, career paths, they all divide into these 4 broad aspects. And people tend to slide into the career path that resonates with theirs. I had a friend who was in my class and is from the ashram school. His parents, who were devotees, removed him from the school because they decided he will be a doctor. Of course, that was not his temperament, but that was his parents' fantasy. So they put him into medical school and he comes out. Eventually, I met him after 20 years. I asked, what you're doing? He's in the business of medical equipment. So that whole doctor training was pretty much useless, or just gave him familiarity with the medical equipment, which is what he is buying and selling, because that corresponded to his nature much more. Instead, you could take someone who's a knowledge person, put him through the medical journey. He'll come out on the other side, not as a doctor, but as a medical researcher, because his quest is the knowledge, isn't it? And then if you put someone who is the Vaishya temperament, he goes through the medical training, he comes out, he won't be a very good doctor, but he'll make lots of money. Or if he has a larger vitality, he'll build a hospital. He will run the business of medicine. But if the fourth aspect is your dominant theme, you pass through the medical school, you really care for your patients, you look after them, you're happy to serve them in the middle of the night when they call you, that would be the perfect doctor, isn't it? But you need all four types even within the doctor medicine space. So the division is not so hard, rather within all four are other three, and within those are further refinements and so on. This is only to say that there are four soul powers which are not equally developed in us. But our full potential as a human being requires their fullness, because the divine is them all. And if you want to be a perfect instrument of the divine flowing through you in action should not be hampered by your internal limitations or biases or incapacities, isn't it? For example, in my case, in the temperament, I find it very difficult to engage in exchange. When somebody says, you give me this and I'll give you this, I don't feel comfortable. I give and that's it. But if you make an exchange, something in me goes, that feels weird. And it's a lack of that capacity. I look at people who are able to do that and I say, wow, if only I could develop it. So I know that I need to work on this, and maybe with the right opportunities in life, I will perhaps do it. But that's one way, through an external experience to build that. I'm very happy to serve. Or I'm very happy to dwell in knowledge. The heroic aspect is not so strong. Leadership is hesitant. I'd rather stay behind the scenes. So again, I recognize this as a lack. I need to work on it. And sometimes life will throw challenges at you to force that part to develop. But that's not the shortest way. That would take you many lifetimes to get there. The yoga is to accelerate that. The yoga is to become conscious of those powers as a potential within and to allow their flowering into out. The reshaping of your temperament from this outflow of energy. And the result will be very rapidly, within days, weeks, even years at most. It will be stabilized with the full flowering of these capacities. And you will see how Sri Aurobindo describes these aspects developing within him in his diary notes, and it's quite remarkable. And then they all fuse into a single multifaceted spectrum of a free streaming divine energy, able to freely do whatever it needs to do, without these limitations or these divisions. And so this is one aspect of the amplification of your capacity. There's the amplification of your mind's capacities, intelligence, your life energy. Most of us don't have enough life energy. After all the sleep that you get, you're lucky if you wake up fresh. Some of us just don't, even after 10 hours. Why? It's a fundamental incapacity or lack or misalignment. So there are very basic, simple practices to be able to infuse or draw life energy from the universe or from above. And for a while, I said, okay, this is the way to do it. I started doing it. Of course, very quickly the life energy goes up, and then my whole personality began to destabilize. I can't contain it. It's too much. It makes, first of all, biologically it broke my sleep. The body had too much energy. It didn't know how to sleep when it had so much energy. Emotions couldn't contain when the energy was too high, a difficulty, and boof, it came out with a big explosion. Forms of anger or intensity of outburst. What do I do? You see how it is? Getting the energy is not difficult. Shaping your personality to be able to contain and then effectively use that energy streaming through without distortion, that's the difficult part. And that needs to be cultivated. And of course, there's the slow process, life circumstances compelling you, and there's the fast process from the yoga force working inside out. But this also needs to be done. You should be able to, remember, enter in relation to the infinite. You should be able to have an infinity of energy flow through you, beaming out like a lighthouse. when necessary, and then dimming as needed, and intensifying as needed, with whatever aspect of power needed for that given situation. You see, this exceptional woman, one of the most extraordinary in European history, is Joan of Arc, who singly walks before an entire army of the British and says, "Turn back, because I see only a river of blood where all of you are dead." They're so overwhelmed by the power and vision that she is able to transmit that they drop their arms, turn away, and walk away. You cannot explain this by pure physical causes. It's the spiritual power that she was able to beam out in this intensity. What a vehicle. I do not know what was the form of her body, but whatever it was, the power that would have emanated from her was humongous at that moment. But she was able to contain and allow it to stream through without distortion. And this we have to be able to develop if we are to be instruments for infinity of Satchidananda, isn't it? To be able to experience the bliss of Satchidananda in its infinity while in a physical body, well, you have to have a really solid base to support that infinity, but also a vehicle that can reflect or transmit an infinity of energy. So this is another aspect of the Shakti, perfection of Shakti. And then there are other aspects of the Maheshwari, Mahakali, Mahalakshmi, Mahasaraswati powers also to be able to stream through. There's a very interesting comment Mother makes of, she looks at the picture when she was in Japan, and she points to that picture of her and says, this is, I think it was Mahasaraswati, and then she says, very sweet, I'd love to have her back. Of course, she could dynamically beam out any of these aspects, embody them fully. And as you see in the darshans with those 4 images, you've seen, she was able to simply shift from any one poise to the other, or all of them in their totality. This also is an aspect of the perfection. So, not much that you have to do right now about it, simply to realize that whatever capacities you have need to be able to grow out into their higher, fuller potential. And it's only when they reach their fullness of acme that they can become vehicles for the supramental consciousness, which is infinite. And from their infinite knowledge, infinite power, infinite beauty and bliss, all these would be able to flow through. So naturally the next step comes the ascent and the opening of consciousness to their source above. Recognizing that everything within us is the tail end, so to say, of a divine potential. The tail end has to open out by amplifying and widening to its source above, so that our consciousness itself ascends out of the intellect through the intuitive into the supramental. And we have touched upon this before, but simply as a first step, our priority is in the quieting and stilling of the mind to open to this higher poise of the deeper knowing, which is the intuitive consciousness. And remember, it's already there. When you become still, you allow it to reflect. So train yourself to be able to be still. Sri Aurobindo puts this as first requirement, to be able to remain completely silent in the mind at will for as long as you need to. Once you have this, it is relatively easy to then to turn inward or upward to receive the reflection of the higher knowledge. And then gradually, not only there's a reflection of the knowledge, you literally feel as if a light of a higher intuition filling you. And your mind is suddenly filled, suffused with a kind of a knowledge and understanding of whatever the situation is before you. And then gradually, not only the mind is habituated by the infusion, it finds itself lifted into a higher poise and begins to live more and more in a working which is naturally of the intuitive consciousness. And at that point, you look at the intellect, if it has been trained enough, you look at it more as a vehicle to articulate what you know in the intuitive. And this is where the true role of the mind is. The intelligence given to you is not a vehicle of knowledge. It is only a temporary use to find knowledge, and it will always make mistakes. Intuition is the vehicle for knowledge. Intellect is the vehicle for articulation, to serialize that which is known in the intuition, to convert this 3D experience into a sequential expression. But if if this has been sufficiently developed, you have a powerful instrument through which to articulate. You see, Sri Aurobindo's mastery of languages allowed him to articulate these higher experiences in a way that as you read, the experience hits you, or you're pulled into the experience. If he did not have that, the capacity or the vocabulary or the skill of articulation being dimmed, although the experience is complete, the articulation would have been a dimmed reflection. As it is, any articulation is a dimmed reflection, but it would be far more dimmed. Sri Aurobindo, particularly having gone into why it was important, when you look back at his life, it's amazing to see. He went into the Greek and Latin roots, and then came to India and then went into the Sanskrit roots. And mastering language from the root outward, the result was when he uses these words, it is done with the sense of their root meaning, which has the greatest mantric power. And that's why when you pause and read, even in the Life Divine, you take a word and go to its etymology in the Latin or in the Greek, and you understand from there, it as if puts a third dimension into the meaning. And when he is writing, when he is speaking, it is coming from that kind of an understanding of the linguistic roots. So that's how the full impact of the precision and the force of the words is there. So this is just to say that the intelligence well developed, which is our journey so far in our life, is important to become a vehicle for this higher intuitive knowledge to flow through. And eventually through that, when the intuition opens to infinity, it becomes the overmental and eventually supramental. Don't worry about that too much. Focus on this, the rest will follow inevitably, for which the first base is quieting of the mind and then turning inward, upward. This being the third perfection in integral yoga, the fourth perfection is of the body. Because this highest consciousness now must manifest through this vehicle, linking the highest supramental spirit down to the most physical material. It is this infusion and the transformation of the body to receive that and to be a vehicle of that, which is the whole goal of this evolution. And then the focus on the body comes subsequently. Interesting. Although you may work on the body from the beginning to prepare it, its divinization comes only when you have access to a higher power which can infuse into it. And that higher power may be intuition, surely. But right now what you have is an intelligence. Your mentalization of the body is your base, and that's what you do with exercises of any kind. You may go to the gym to work on a body part and strengthen it. That's your mind awareness being infused. If at that time you have the intuitive consciousness and you're able to infuse that, the result will be far greater. The body itself will intuitively know how to reshape itself or heal itself. Very interesting. The body has an internal knowledge by which it corrects any illness. You have an indigestion, what do? You do nothing. You allow the body the time to settle itself, it finds its balance. You're not even conscious of what happens within you. But when it is intuitivized, that action instead of being mechanical from the old instinct, now becomes an active conscious awareness. You will feel, there's an indigestion. You will the correction, and now it's settled. Amazing. This is a capacity we all have in certain parts, to some degree. You see, it happens when you have you suddenly you get a catch in the muscles. The muscle knots up. What do you do at that point? You instinctively feel inside, reach out and loosen it, and that's it. You got free of it. If you didn't, the knot stays now for days. How did you get that knowledge? That's the edge of the mind, intuition mixing, and that's about it. But this infusing all the way into the body, all the operations tended to become intuitivized and can now heal, shape consciously. And this is well within our capacity in this very lifetime. Whether you choose to focus on the body or not, that's your choice. But since our goal is to open out on all fronts, do it along with all else. May not be that you give it as much importance if that's not your way. If that is your way, then please give it all the importance, but don't stop with the mentalization of body. That would be a poor benefit. open to the intuition, and bring something deeper and higher into this. This then would be the perfection of the physical body, which would have naturally also not only health, but freedom from weariness, freedom from tiredness, a spontaneous sense of beauty that the body will begin to glow and express. And all these would be the perfection of the body consciousness. There are two more which represent the perfection of living in the divine consciousness and being an instrument of the divine consciousness. So the fifth perfection is this instrumentality. The sixth perfection is the living in oneness of the divine beatitude. Would be natural consequences of the first three taken to their full. So I don't dwell too much on it. But that's when you have the full participation as a conscious being of Satchidananda, living in the body which is itself an expression of Satchidananda, acting out in a world that is the playground of the Satchidananda's delight. It is to this that the evolution is leading us. It is this which is realized by the accelerated process of the integral yoga. You see how different this is from all existing forms of spirituality or religion. They were all useful because they helped to prepare that first foundation, to create a base in which different aspects of this perfection were touched upon by various traditions and religions. But the fullness of this, in which the world itself is your field of realization and manifestation, is only found in this new beginning that Sri Aurobindo represents in the spiritual evolution and history of humanity. In our own practice, as I said, start with that which is for you the most natural, the most easy. Keep always at the background this larger picture of what needs to be done. And every opportunity that comes, take small steps. Read a little bit every day, which is one of the simplest ways to rekindle, reawaken your sense of purpose, your aspiration. Do something every day, whether it is through karma, yoga, or whether it is through a form of meditation or concentration, or simply sitting with no special effort, opening yourself to the presence of the Divine Mother, or turning inward to the presence of this soul or self within you, your psychic being, in a quiet aspiration. What form is not important. Once you have this perspective, little steps in these directions will be spontaneously, as if taken by the aspiration that is inside you. This is the reason why Sri Aurobindo highlights the emergence of the psychic influence as the principal priority. The more that comes forward, the more your sense of life purpose is felt, because that's the one who chose to take birth. The more that comes forward, the yoga itself becomes a natural thing, because Sri Aurobindo says the psychic being is the natural yogin. And so its influence fills your thoughts, automatically turns them to something higher, refines, purifies simply by its influence. Like a magnet which makes iron fillings fall into place, your personality and its disparate, chaotic tendencies simply fall into place in alignment to the psychic influence. And so if there is one thing you need to do as a priority, dwell more on the awareness of the deep core of aspiration within you, inviting it, allowing its influence to fill you and to glow out in you and through you in your whole life around. With all this, we are not alone. The journey of instinctive, mechanical, subconscious yoga of nature was from below, but from above is the active, dynamic power of the divine Shakti, the divine Mother. She pours herself to fill all things and to form the universe. She pours herself equally in you, carries you, embraces you, and is with you at all times. But we are like the egg that is closed with its shell. So you can nurture the egg as the hen does, but until the chick pops a hole and invites the action and the help, the direct help is not there. So she broods on you, warms you from outside, but when you open and say, help me, the words are not important, the act of opening is important. Straight away she pours and begins to work, to the extent that you allow. And this is the reason why in the integral yoga, the principal methods are of opening and self-giving. In whichever part and to whatever degree you are able to open, the action of the Shakti begins. To the extent that you are able to give yourself, the change, the transformation takes place. So there's a letter of Sri Aurobindo where the disciple asks, I heard from so-and-so that if I surrender myself entirely to the mother, she will transform me in an instant. Is it true? What do you think she would say? He says, yes, if you surrender yourself entirely. The problem is the entirely, because we are not even conscious of ourselves. So you can only surrender in the little part that's conscious. And so that part begins to receive. But because it receives, it percolates into other parts and makes the other parts conscious, which then allows you to surrender more, which allows greater action, and so on. So that's why initially your effort is needed. But increasingly, as this interchange begins, the action of the force working in you, because of your opening, the more you are able to give up your effort into the hands of the force that comes and actively participate in a kind of an awareness which accepts simply. It's not a passive acceptance, it's an active acceptance, a participative acceptance. And so, through this process, bit by bit, until the entire work is taken up by the Shakti, and you are only there as a conscious participant, offering yourself as a vehicle, as an instrument. And that's when the most rapid completion of the process is done. So this is the broad framework of the yoga. Remember, do not confuse the method with the ascetic methods. Even if there are similarities, they're fundamentally different, and the form of the practice fundamentally different, intended for a full divinization of life. Every morning when you wake up from sleep, consider your body, your mind, your life energies. Recognize these are instruments to be divinized. Look at the experiences and responsibilities of your life around you, and look at these as the domain in which this growth has to take place. And every opportunity, every situation is there to help you to grow. Consciously place this with an intention. And then you will see how rapidly circumstances begin to align to help you in this. I think with this I will pause on the theme. We have crossed the time, is it?
15 minutes over.
Okay, so we have... So Sri Aurobindo has hewed this path, himself gone through all the struggles, overcome all these difficulties and formed the way. We don't have to struggle with it. The path is laid out, and the more we are able to open, the more easily we find ourselves carried by the work already done by Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. So two things: the spontaneous influence of the psychic within you, the active help of the Divine Mother. And with these two working, the outcome is certain. Without a doubt. The question of time is not important, because each step is a step of growth and joy. Isn't it? Does not matter what your physical age is. Where we are today is our beginning and the next step. And then we try to achieve the maximum that we can in this lifetime. We don't leave anything for the next. You should wish to live 100 years entirely, remember? Of joy. Enjoying life at each step. We'll take a moment to concentrate on this in aspiration and in assimilation.